Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Shoot Room Sessions. Natalie, welcome to the Shoot Room Sessions.
It's delightful to be here in this wonderful, beautiful, glorious, sunny setting.
Thank you very much. Can you tell people who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name's Natalie Bennett. For really formal occasions, that's Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle. This is not a formal occasion. It's never a formal occasion. Natalie Bennett. So I'm one of the two Green Party members of the House of Lords. So I came into the House of Lords 4.5 years ago. Before that, I was leader of the Green Party of England and Wales from 2012 to 2016. So people don't have to sit there wondering. The accent comes from Australia originally. And my first degree is agricultural science, which makes me really unusual in politics. And there's very few people in politics from a scientific background. So I have at least a scientific background. I was a journalist for 20 years, finished as editor of The Guardian Weekly. Now I do full-time politics and confront the government.
Wow, what a start. You've lived in tons of different places. So can you highlight some of those to us? So you talked about Australia and the UK. How do those cultures differ?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I left Australia quite deliberately. I would have no desire. I can't imagine going back to Australia by choice. Australia is a culture that's very money dominated. Yet we don't have a class system in Australia, but what we have is a money system. So when I was a child, there was something called a prominent Sydney racing identity, which was code word for an illegal bookmaker. And they went through a phase of making a great deal of money. And so they would arrive at the races with in their own helicopter with a supermodel on their arm. And, they were the top of the social heap until they ended up in jail. But, so it's a very money-dominated culture. You might have heard of the tall poppy syndrome, which is a particularly Australian thing, of particularly anti-intellectualism. I quite deliberately left Australia, came to the UK. Why did I come to the UK? Well, I came here as a backpacker in 1990 and I touched the wall of St. Bartholomew the Great Church and went, wow, this is 1,000 years old. And then I went to Istanbul and went to the Hagia Sophia and went, wow, this is 1,600 years old. And so when I was in Australia, we had very little education, or indeed there was not much knowledge of the Aboriginal cultures, something I remain really interested in now. But I wasn't taught all of that stuff, so Europe was just amazing. And also, as an in-print journalist, English language, London was totally the natural place to be.
Sounds like you've always had a thirst for learning and knowledge.
I think that's true, yes. I was only actually just reflecting when I started the agricultural science degree, I had a rather romantic idea. No one in my family had ever been to university before. We didn't know anyone who'd been to university.
I was the same.
And it was like, I thought this was going to be this hive of amazing knowledge and debate and understanding. And then I discovered that I had a statistics lecturer who'd been reading out the same lectures for 40 years and just stood in front of the class and read out his lecture and left again. And, I was forced to, I could for about 4 hours write down, diagram the two photosynthetic pathways. And that was just something you had to regurgitate for the exam. So I was terribly disappointed with that. And that's why virtually immediately after that, when I decided to become a journalist, I also started a degree that turned into Asian studies, but was basically history and politics at the University of New England, that's Australia, which operates sort of like the OU here. So yes, I have managed to accumulate 3 degrees.
Being the first person in the family to go to uni, did you recognise that as a big step at the time? Was it something you were proud of or scared of? How did it feel?
It was more, I think it was a natural step. I went to a fee-paying school in Australia, which is actually much less uncommon than it is here, but I only went because I got a scholarship. So the school I was at, the background was, it was a natural thing. It was very much the era of push girls to do science. If I knew what I knew now, that's not the course I would have done. But they were trying to get me to push to do veterinary medicine because I had the marks to do veterinary medicine. And thank goodness I had the sense to say no, because I did a week with a vet in their surgery and thought, no, that's not what I want to do.
Nice. So why journalism? What was the calling to write?
The chance to learn and know about everything. I started off in the Eastern Riverina Observer in Henty, population 1,000. And we covered 4 or 5 other towns that were in the same area. And, you know, I did the brownies making their promise. I did Mrs. Smith winning the cake baking competition. But I could also do interviews with people who'd come back from working in Papua New Guinea with a guy who was trying to sell barley to China. So many things that I had the chance to learn about.
How did you get excited about those little stories? How did you manage to find the note, the passion, the enthusiasm to share it?
I think it's a bit like now. I'm still strange in politics in that I love canvassing, going door to door and knocking on people's doors. If someone opens the door and you have, you know, in this case, a couple of minutes to have an insight into their life, their perspective, what they've done, how they think, why they're doing it. And it's just fascinating. I mean, human beings are infinitely fascinating creatures. Humans can be amazingly creative, inventive, and different. And it's fascinating to find out about all of them. And also, you know, science, you know, how the world works. That's what I thought I was going to get doing the ag science degree, for which I was unfortunately sorely disappointed. But, I've followed it up since.
I think that's especially true if people bother to notice. I think too often we're head in the phone, rushing through life. Even in a conversation, we're not watching and listening to understand and learn more. We're just waiting to respond. I think you've got to really look for the nuance in people. And that's one of the absolute joys of being able to sit in this chair and ask people questions. It's deciding which avenue to take in the next question and which is asking too much or not far enough, and finding the stories from people in this setting as opposed to maybe the print journalism. Had you always written from being a child? Is it something you didn't enjoy doing?
Yes, I guess I had. I mean, I had a, in retrospect, extremely strange play produced by the school in probably 5th form.
That's pretty cool.
Yes, it was a pretty strange play. It was about the story of a revolution and everyone got shot at the end. I'm not quite sure what the parents and everyone made of it, to be honest.
Revolutionary from the start. And was journalism the first job that brought you across to when you were in the UK?
Yes, I mean, what happened in the middle was I spent 5 years in Thailand, and that was I was just about I'd finished doing as far as I could in rural papers in Australia, and so the next step was really Sydney Morning Herald or The Age, but they didn't entirely excite me, and the idea I mean, they run so many stories because, you know, as is true of journalism around the world, they've been cut back and cut back and cut back. And once upon a time, both of them would have had significant foreign bureaus, etc. But more and more they were running, you know, they had a couple of foreign correspondents and the rest were things they picked up from The Guardian and reprinted or whatever. So they'd narrowed and narrowed. And I can remember once there was they could be very provincial. The Sydney Morning Herald, once about the time I was deciding whether or not to stay, was the front page story was huge traffic jam on the Gladesville Bridge. And the huge traffic jam on the Gladesville Bridge didn't really grip me as a concept. And so I applied to Australian Volunteers Abroad, which is like VSO, Volunteer Service Overseas in the UK. And they offered me a role with the Thai National Commission on Women's Affairs, working with them for a couple of years in that volunteer role. And it sounded great, so I took it.
And what was the culture like living there?
It's interesting because there was 2 cultural clashes. There's obviously the experience of living in a place where things are very different. But there was also going from journalism to the civil service. And the Thai civil service is like extreme civil service.
Oh.
And so once there was something we should have done months and months before, and I eventually discovered this and was trying to do this on a Friday afternoon. So at least we sent the invitations to the Vietnamese and the Lao embassy slightly sooner than Monday would be. But I didn't have the address lined up quite right underneath the letterhead, and so I couldn't send that fax. Those kind of things were challenging. I mean, it was fascinating. It was an amazing experience, but the whole nature of civil service and me as a journalist was just like, get out there, get the story, get it done, get it out. There was quite a clash.
So I, first person in my family to go to uni, first person to finish school, actually, never mind uni. Dad was a builder, mum was a cleaner and a teaching assistant. So from being a toddler, working on building sites, manual jobs, all the way through to pay my way through university. Came out 2009, just after the financial crisis, first in PhD, nowhere recruiting, and I had no work experience in a sort of business sense. Good at digging holes, but that was about it. And looked like I could dig holes. So joined the Environment Agency, only place that was recruiting. It was like Yes Minister without the comedy. It was awful. No one did very much at all. One of my early meetings, I remember being told, we've got to make these massive budget cuts. We've got to find a way to save £1 million across this business. So I run off and I come back with this dossier of 20 pages of options that we can do things. And the chairman of the board of this group went, what on earth have you done this for? And I was like, you told me to go find... And he's like, no, Rich, we just talk about doing these things. Don't... And the rest of the room were all 20 years older than me, and they were just so disappointed. Because then it's like, well, maybe we could do this. And they were like, no one can do anything. And I had 9 years of that. I had 16 jobs in 9 years, because every 6 months I went, no one's doing a huge amount. We really need to be doing something. So they just promoted me. And then we had the most amicable divorce in 2018, where they were sick of me demanding they did better and try and change the world. And I was sick of them not letting me. So I could empathise with the public. How did that not put you off politics as well then?
Well, I mean, I think, this is Thailand, it's a place that has a very broken political system. For which, this is actually in the book we'll probably be talking about later, for which both the UK and the US have significant responsibility, because when I was there, we had the very respected long-term king who'd been through the Vietnam War era, etc., had been very much propped up by the UK and the US. And, was held in great respect by the Thai public as well. But it wasn't really a democracy. And, of course, subsequently, tragically, we've had coups and all the rest of it. So, it was a very, very dysfunctional place, and in terms of the politics. And one of the things that, I saw was that there was a huge desire not to lift people up. For example, under a huge amount of international pressure, they ensured there was 3 years of compulsory secondary education was brought in when I was there. But they didn't give the schools any money or the teachers any training. And so, out in Isan, the poorest northeast area, there I met teachers who were, they'd had to split the school into 2 sessions, morning and afternoon. And they didn't have a lot of education themselves, and they were having to read the textbook in the morning to teach high school in the afternoon, and in the classroom that they'd thrown all the younger kids out of. And so, there were lots of things that were very specific to Thailand in terms of the way the frustrations.
Nice. So let's look at your second career contents page. So we go from journalism into the world of politics. Mm-hmm. How did that first come about?
Well, I always knew at some stage that I would leave journalism.
Because?
20 years of doing mostly international news. I've seen lots of people over the years this has happened to. You have famines, you have coups, you have wars, you have horrible, lots of other horrible things happening. And eventually it feels like you're just reporting disaster after disaster.
Did you emotionally carry the weight of those things?
Well, I think as a journalist, it's kind of inevitable that you both have a certain degree of black humour in the office, and you also need a certain amount of distance, because if you thought really hard about every story you dealt with that day, you would just lose it. But I saw lots of people after sort of 20 years either get very cynical or very depressed. And so I always thought at some stage I'm going to leave journalism and go and change the news rather than report it. That was the driving force. But I would have expected to do, when I was in Thailand, I did quite a bit of United Nations work with WHO, with the International Labour Organisation, various groups. And I kind of thought UN maybe, or a campaigning group, charity, those sorts of things. But on the 1st of January 2006, I just stopped working nights at the Times, and I thought, I'm going to do something about the state of the world, New Year's resolution and all of that. And I joined the Green Party with absolutely no expectation of where it would lead me, but just to do something. And then I ended up in the House of Lords.
Wow. So forgive me, before we leave the journalism side of things, how would you describe the sort of day-to-day working? What did life look and feel like as a journalist at the top of her career? What did it feel like? And what way?
I'll divide this in two, because I worked at the Times for a few years when I first came to London, and that on a daily newspaper, and the Times is probably an extreme of this, is an enormous daily adrenaline rush. And if you take, for example, when the Americans went into Afghanistan, I was the night editor that night, and I tore the whole paper apart, and I couldn't, actually I can say this now, the photo editor had gone home, even though they weren't supposed to have gone home. And so I had to dig up a photo and slap it on the front page of the Times, and there were no live photos, and I just had to find what I could. And and that's just the most amazing adrenaline rush. You're doing it with production teams screaming in your ear saying, it's got to go, it's got to go, it's got to go. And so a daily adrenaline rush like that was great. And then the Guardian Weekly, of course, being a weekly.
Wait. So, and did you enjoyed that adrenaline rush? That was.
I will admit to being an adrenaline junkie. I also used to be, a rugby player, so it's not necessarily the best side of my character, but the number 8, a bit too slow to actually be a number 8, but that's where I played.
That's amazing. So living in that adrenaline fueled lifestyle, how were you conscious about sort of rest and recovery and how you went in the next day, or it was just a relentless go?
You don't really do that sort of rest and recovery, and you just keep going. That's the culture. That's the way it is in news. Daily news journalism is full on, and I used to love it. I still probably could still love it, but it's not necessarily either a good way to live or, you're very seldom seeing the wood for the trees.
Why did you stop playing rugby?
Oh, well, it was, I played for, when I was at university, and so there wasn't any teams in Thailand. I played touch rugby in Thailand. I did actually play touch rugby against it was the Bangkok Sevens tournament. I played for the British club against the Thai military. They hadn't really got the message about it being only touch rugby. So some of my teammates were a bit freaked out, but, it didn't worry me.
You quite enjoyed that, right?
Yeah.
I love it. I was a failed athlete in lots of different sports when I was younger. The reason I did degree into PhD was I was playing American football for the Great Britain student team at the time, and they said, if you're still a student, we'll pay for the football. So the PhD was to keep playing sport. But I take my approach to business from that sporting world, and you'll see the same thing in rugby. The feedback mechanism is pretty dramatic and instantaneous. If you're not on the ball at the right time, you're on the floor. And what I loved about, so coming out of that environment, so impact and contact sport, I used to compete at powerlifting. So it was very direct, high performance environments. Moving that into the public sector was really difficult because it wasn't that way. But when I was able to move into the private sector, all of a sudden it was like, brilliant. You can have that urgency of feedback, that immediate reaction again that I didn't find in the interim period. But I think that I can see that thread running throughout your career, the adrenaline bit that you were describing, and that rising to challenge every bit of the way. Okay, so we'd gone from the sort of daily grind of the excitement, and there was a second chapter of the journalism?
Which was when doing the Guardian Weekly, which is, I used to very unpopularly around the Guardian, described as the Guardian without the fluffy bits. So it was basically international news, the main events of the week. You were really analysing to see what the main things were that someone who was only reading a paper once a week would need to know. Plus a bit of, we used to translate material from Le Monde. And so you also got to translate sort of art exhibitions in Paris and fun things like that. But it was all sort of serious journalism. And it was also, really trying to make a judgment call. And I'd been a journalist for long enough then that sometimes what's printed in daily newspapers is absolute bunk. And 6 hours later, you will know that it's absolute bunk. And so what you're doing in a weekly paper is trying to apply what you know about the world to go, that story just smells wrong. I'm just not going to run that next week. Let's see what's happened next week, whether we need to run it next week kind of thing.
Were you, was the you that presents now in terms of the confidence, the honesty and the directness, was that always you?
I think so, probably not the confidence in that, I didn't come from the kind of family that gave you that social confidence. But, if you ask me a question, I'll always answer it. And, I get described as blunt a great deal. Often applied with the adjective Australian as well. Australian bluntness is, and I guess that's partly my character, my upbringing. But also, when I was a child, we didn't have a television until I was 10. And so I missed out on a lot of the polite socialisation and the socialisation, gender roles and things like that kids get from the culture around them. My parents were teenage parents, and so none of their friends had kids. And so I was my first 10 years of my life were very strange. And so I didn't get socialised into lots of things that lots of people get socialised into. So, ask me a question, I'll generally answer it.
The best people are very strange. Do you think that honesty and that directness, was that difficult earlier in your career when you were more junior in organisations? Did senior people find that a challenge, do you think?
Not really. I think partly, Australian newspapers, provincial newspapers, are quite short-staffed by British standards, certainly. And you also, pussyfooting around would get you absolutely nowhere. I mean, I was the Cootamundra Herald, which was a group that produced about 7 papers a week, little local papers. And the boss had been there for 40 years and started as a paper boy. And a new group took it over, and they forced him to take lots and lots of holidays. He just stacked up like 50 weeks of holidays. So I was about 26 and running this group while he took all these holidays. And, to keep the printers in line, I eventually realised I basically had to act out losing my temper and screaming and swearing once a week, because you were seen as...
check the behaviour.
You were seen as weak if you didn't do that kind of thing. So, Australian news journalism certainly probably encouraged those trends rather than discouraged them.
Nice. And was that unique in the sort of journalism worm culture over here, or were others, your peer group, were they similarly as honest and as forthright?
Well, I can remember probably the first time I swore on the Times backbench. I realised there was all these pursed lips around and disgruntled looks. She swore. Particularly a woman just swore. So I've toned all that down in British journalism context.
Brilliant. So we're leaving journalism aside, and you've decided you're going to change the world. Mm-hmm. How did you go about doing that?
Well, I joined the Green Party, and it's really all Sian Berry's fault. She's now our candidate to replace Caroline Lucas in the Brighton Pavilion seat.
Can you give people a feel for the state of the Green Party when you joined, scale and social resonance?
Okay, well, when I joined the Green Party, I think we had about 6,000 members, and we probably had 20 or 30 councillors all around the country. But about 9 months in, Sian Berry asked me to do this little national job. It involves writing a few emails, writing a few newsletters. You can do it in your sleep, fine, which is how I came to be on the national executive of the Green Party 9 months after I joined.
So alert to everyone, if you get asked to do a little national job, it's probably not a little job.
Exactly. And so there hadn't been an internal communications coordinator on the national executive before that. I spent the first few months waiting for someone to tell me what to do, and then I realised no one was going to tell me what to do. And so I did that for 4 years. The Green Party was starting to grow a little. But then I remember this very distinctly because it was 2012. It would have been May. I'd done 5 years as editor of the Guardian Weekly. My plan was to take voluntary redundancy, use the money to have a sabbatical, have a lovely year, growing vegetables, baking bread, writing a book. And then Caroline Lucas rang up. And to give a bit of context to this, the Green Party, we don't elect a leader permanently. We just elect leaders for 2-year terms. And Caroline was coming to the end of her second 2-year term. And no one had really thought about this. But Caroline rang me up and said she wasn't going to stand for leader. And I put the phone down and went, oh, hell. Actually, that's the polite version, but oh, hell. And I was being lined up to be deputy leader.
Do you actually think, oh, hell?
Yes.
Because...
Well, I was thinking of that all that bread, all those vegetables, the book writing. I was looking forward to this lovely, fun year.
But you've always found yourself in leadership positions, whether you've sought them or not. Your career story, the sports field, that you've always been a leader, whether it was an active choice or not. You've always found yourselves in those positions, haven't you?
Yes. I mean, I think one of my tales for this was when I was backpacking in 1990 around Europe. And I got off the ferry from Rhodes into Rhodes at 6 a.m. in the morning or something, sat up overnight as one does as a backpacker. And there was a group of people who were really hapless and hopeless, and somehow or other I ended up leading them to find the tourist office and to find a hotel. There were some Israelis, there were some Germans, and somehow or other I ended up...
International relations.
It just seems to happen like that. I don't know why. It's it's probably I've become over the years very Shakespearean in my belief that everyone's strength is their weakness. If you ask me a question, if you present me with a problem, I find it very hard to resist the urge to fix it or to answer it. And it's a strength and a weakness.
I don't think you can teach leadership in people. I think you can give people a skill set to make it 1 or 2 points better. But the great captains of sports teams, the great leaders in business and things, there is something innate about the way that person operates that others choose to lead. I think you can't just pick someone up and say, right, you're going to be a leader now, go do it, and they can read 3 books and do it. I think there's something about them.
Won't entirely agree with you on that one.
Give me one that's been taught. Give me a great leader.
No, I'm not just saying being taught, but being developed.
I think you can add to it. I just don't think you can go from 0 to 8. I think you can go +1 or +2 or improve somebody's leadership.
I mean, I agree with you, but I think everyone has leadership within them, but it may be different kinds of leadership. I mean, one of my lines is, everyone in the Green Party is a leader. Just by joining the Green Party, you've said, I'm going to make something different. I'm going to make change. I'm going to lead. And now some of those people will be, like me, quite loud, quite outgoing, quite, get up and yell and say, come on, folks, come here. But other people can lead in different ways. Someone might say, gosh, everyone looks a bit tired. Don't you think we all should sit down and have a rest? And look, I've baked some cookies. And that's a form of leadership. It's a different kind of leadership. So there's all kinds of different ways for people to contribute, to show different paths, different directions, different ways of seeing things. I'm not very keen on the idea as the leader of the sports captain, the one who goes and tries and plows through the line and leaps over the line. It's all a group effort, and you've got to see all of those different forms of leadership feeding in together. And everyone can be the leader in their own way. It doesn't mean everyone can get up there and stand and yell, go, yay, over the barricades, folks. But there's lots of different ways of leading.
I agree. It takes all sorts to form a perfect team. So the phone's gone down, and you're suddenly faced with the daunting prospect of, I might have to be the leader of the Green Party here.
Well, I was being lined up to be deputy leader,
okay.
But there was a bloke being lined up to be leader, and he had a certain vision of what the role of leader was for. I had a very different vision of that, and I sort of thought, well, no, I don't really fancy deputy. You may be confirming what you said earlier. I'm going to go for leader. And so it was.
I don't really fancy deputy.
Yeah. It was interesting. So the Green Party had never really had a seriously contested leadership. I mean, the post had only been created 4 years before, and someone had stood against Caroline Lucas for the first time. The second time there was no contest, and so I actually fought this election campaign in a way that no internal election in the Green Party had ever been fought before. And also a little tip. This was probably less known then. It's more known now. Is because the bookmakers knew nothing about the Green Party leadership. There was 4 people in the race, and I was only number 3 in the bookmakers' odds. So I put 50 quid on myself, and that lifted me up into second favour in the bookmakers' odds, which the journalists looked at. And I had quite a nice party for all my supporters on the proceeds.
Brilliant. So when you're faced with the prospect of that campaign, what was the plan? What was the strategy? How did you know how to plan for it? How did you approach it?
Well, I mean, as I said, the Green Party had never really had an internal campaign before, so it was a case of looking at the rules and working out what was possible. And there was quite a tight spending limit. So, for example, I enlisted 2 of the candidates for deputy leader, and we did a joint thing whereby we had 3 letters, each independently, but we stuffed them in an envelope, and we posted some of those, and we hand-delivered lots of them, others to members. So we actually had a campaign, we had a website, nice video, and all those sorts of things, which they're very obvious now, but they weren't quite so obvious in 2012.
How did you know to do those things? Where did the genesis of that idea come from?
To be fair, I have to partly credit Jim Jeps, who was my partner at the time, who'd had a lot more experience in politics than I had. But it was also just like, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it, sort of thing.
Yeah, love it. Okay, so and what was that election process like in terms of the balloting and you finding out the result?
Well, I mean, one of the sort of evolutions of it was we went around the country and did hustings around the country. And I think it actually became evident that it was Manchester, we were about the 4th or 5th hustings, and there was you could feel the shift happening. Everyone had assumed that the guy who started as favourite was going to win, but gradually there was a shift. And actually, I'd undoubtedly learnt a great deal in that time. I remember after the London hustings, an old friend of mine who's been a supporter for many years said, "You were much better than I thought you were going to be." It's like, thanks, Ed. That's great.
It is great when you get those from the team, isn't it? You weren't as terrible as me. Okay, great. Thanks. Appreciate that.
And so it's sort of by the end of the campaign period, it was sort of becoming obvious. And I mean, the competition Peter, he was sure he was going to lose. I wasn't quite so sure, but that was the way it worked out. And so we did the count in the London offices. And then with, and this is back when the Green Party had half a dozen staff and, one press person. And so I went and did Andrew Neil on Politics Live at lunchtime, and no one ran through what questions he might ask. I just stood there and had a mouthpiece in had an earpiece in my ear, which I couldn't hear very loud. I didn't know you could ask to turn it up louder, and faced Andrew Neil with no preparation at all. And it's kind of like, that's what I know now is not quite how to do it. But
what would you tell you now going into that interview? So if the next leader X years' time rings you up and says, what advice do you give me going into that scenario? What would you tell them?
Well, I think it's, do a bit of rehearsal and work out what the questions might be would be a good start, which is, politics 101. It was just, I'd been focused on the election had happened that morning, the count had happened that morning. I'd had 2 hours notice to get used to the idea that I was now leader of the Green Party. And we didn't have then the professional structures we have now around to make it happen.
And so we've just come off the back of local election results, which have seen incredible increases for the Green Party, which is amazing. And there's probably more councillors in Bristol alone now than there was in 2006, full stop.
Exactly, that's right. I mean, the graph for the last 4 or 5 years literally is exponential growth. It looks like that. And, we've now got 810 or something like that councillors. We're running Suffolk District Council, the majority administration there. We're the largest group on Bristol. And I think we've now got all but one county council. We've now got county councillors on every county council in England. And we're looking towards the general election, getting at least 4 Green MPs, the next generation.
It's incredible. When you took over the leadership, though, and that sort of Andrew Neil type experience, was there still a level of mockery about the environment and the Green Party then, or? I mean, it's come a long way to the credibility we see today, but where was it when you took over in terms of leadership?
Well, I mean, we hardly ever got on the media. I can remember 1 month where the entire list of media consisted of one press release that had been printed in the Economic Voice in London. And when we did get on the media, I used to say there's always either a wind turbine or on really bad days, a rubbish dump behind me. Those are the pictures and those are the stories. And one of the real breakthrough moments was I remember the Westminster Hour asked me on a Sunday night on Radio 4 to talk about social security and benefits, and I got to talk about universal basic income, and that was like a huge breakthrough moment that I'd actually been asked to talk about something that wasn't just demonstrably clearly the environment. But you also you were often left with what you did get asked to do was so crap. That you would decide, is this worth doing or not? And my case study for this was Politics Live again rang up one morning and said, now the background to this story is the European Union had just introduced a voluntary standard for toilet cisterns that you could say this will, put a EU sticker on it to say this is an environmentally friendly cistern if it used more than a certain number of litres of water. And this had been printed in the Mail and the Telegraph as the EU is going to come into your bathroom and smash your toilet cistern. And Politics Live rang me up and said, we've got Peter Bone on, famously Brexiteer, a pro-Brexit kind of person. Will you come on and talk about this? And I'm like, why are you putting Peter Bone on? Why are you following this absolute nonsense story? And, the poor young producer, it's not their responsibility, says to me, oh, please, my boss will be really angry if I can't get someone. And I'm like, oh, well, it's telly, it's putting the Green Party voice out there, okay. Which is how I ended up in a room that literally was not much bigger than it was sort of like the sound room, but they needed an extra studio. We sat next to Peter Bone like this, in front of a picture of a toilet on the back of the wall, a toilet that didn't even have a seat on it. You can still find it out there somewhere in the social media. So it was like, is it any publicity? Is good publicity? Is this actually worth doing? Why? This is a question I put to the BBC often. Why are they reporting this absolute nonsense just because it's been in the right-wing papers?
Do they ever answer the question when you ask them?
No.
How did you maintain the resilience to keep going in the face of that lack of public resonance and traction?
Well, again, we sort of come back to being Shakespearean. My strength is also my weakness in that I will keep going until I fall over.
Do you know why?
Why am I like that? There is something, I mean, if I'm going to say why is my character like it is, some of it comes from my mother, who was not at all like me in many ways. My mother was brought up by a very difficult mother herself, who totally knocked my mother's confidence. My mum was totally not confident, and she had been treated like dirt by her mother. But the one thing my mother was determined to do was that her mother had always tried to make her pay back. I did all these things for you, you've got to pay it back. You've got to pay it back. And mum was determined to just go and do what you want. I'll support you, I'll help you, I'll encourage you. And I'm not going to ask for payment back. So I guess if I looked at one source of that. And also, my mum was married at 17, had me at 18. Often financially things were difficult and complicated. My mother was the one who always held things together. She was the one who quietly, not putting herself forward, but always held things together. So there's a kind of family tradition of that, the women being the people who hold things together, I guess.
It's really interesting. I often get asked, I'm really described as really driven about the way our business grows and what we've done, and I get asked why. And similar, I kind of point to upbringing, but I think it's hard to know in yourself what it is that gives you that drive, that ambition. That there's an amazing mountaineer called Nim Sadai, who was the first person to climb all 14 peaks as quick as possible across the globe. And they asked him why he did it, and his response was, "It was there." I think there's a part of that. Because you've had so many different careers and chapters and subject matter, the arena, the country, the part of the world, whatever you were working in, you were just going to succeed in whatever the context was, because that's what you do as a person, right? You just make it work.
Well, yeah, but I did also start from, the scholarship to a fee-paying school. I start with the foundation.
Only because you went and got it.
So I don't think it's not realistic to say that everyone can do that. People have life experiences that just make that utterly impossible. I mean, I was actually saying about this in the house yesterday. Meeting a young woman in the Northeast in her mid-20s and has spent 10 years as a carer for her father with a horrendous degenerative disease. We don't, as a society, value and give her confidence to say, you've done an amazing thing, you've done great things, but society doesn't respect far too many contributions like that. And that's a particularly gendered thing, care, the contribution people can make through care. They're not respected and acknowledged by society. And, she's now, if, in a few years' time she goes out and starts looking for a job, she's starting with massive disadvantages because our society doesn't really value what she's already achieved in her life.
That makes sense. It isn't possible for everyone. I think it's way more possible for more people than they think it is, but I do agree it's not possible for everyone who's had those difficult spots. When you reflect back on your time as leader of the Green Party, what are you most proud of?
Definitely the election result in 2015. We got 1.1 million votes, which was more votes than we got in every previous general election added together.
That's incredible.
So it was a huge leap. And I mean, of course, preceding that was what was known as the Green Surge. And so on the biggest day, we had more than 3,000 people join the Green Party. And one of the things that I'd contributed to previously as member of the executive, this was a massive leap from anything the Green Party had seen before. The website wobbled, but it didn't fall over. And I know there was lots of work going on behind the scenes, shoveling to try and make sure the website didn't fall over. So, obviously I then got into the leader debates with David Cameron, Ed Miliband and all. I mean, that was a huge, daunting thing. But that, again, was the product of lots of people showing leadership. There was the hashtag was Invite the Greens. And I think it was 250,000, something like that, people who signed the petition to say the Greens have to be in the leader debates because the original plan was to not have the Greens in. So, it was a group effort that produced so much in the end in that election result.
What does that feel like personally to know that you were able to generate that level of support, to have you as part of that process?
To be brutally honest, at the time, I was so exhausted it was literally, thank God it's over. It had been a grueling, difficult time. I was actually ill right through it, as in the way of these things. And, I can look back on it now and think, that was a real landmark. And what I see now is, I was talking about the number of councillors we've got now and the growth in the last few years. We built the foundation in 2015 that then took a couple of years to really see the results. But, and when I see, something like 55,000 members of the Green Party now, as you asked when I started, it was about 6,000. We are on a different scale now, and 2015 was an important part of that.
Amazing. Who was the most impressive politician you debated with, discussed with? Is there anyone that sticks in your mind that spoke particularly well, was so well versed, was prepped the best? Who did you see and go, I'd like to emulate that aspect? Or
I think if you had to look at the leader debates, and indeed I was sort of following her around the television studios and that, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon was on a different scale in that. And if you look at the coverage and the reporting from that era, she stood head and shoulders above everyone else in those debates. But Leanne Wood was also, much more quietly, but, coming from, again, not quite as small a scale as me, but a smaller scale. I was very glad that both Leanne and Nicola were there, because I was the anti-austerity voice in 2015 with Leanne and Nicola. If they hadn't been there, it would have been me on my own, which would have been really feeling like sticking my neck out. And there's a famous photo that was taken, the second leader debate, which didn't have Cameron in it, but had Farage. And the three of us, Nicola, Leanne and I, it was sort of semi-planned, not entirely planned. We finished it with the three of us having a hug, and Farage was kind of hanging around on the outskirts, not knowing what to do. And so that was one of the moments.
What was it about Nicola's process, preparation, delivery? What was it that we can learn from her approach?
She was extremely professional. She was always extremely well briefed. I can't say I entirely approve, but Nicola is very short. It was impressive how she always wore the most amazing stilettos. I don't know, couldn't possibly imagine. My mind would boggle every time I look at them. They look extraordinarily uncomfortable. But no, she was professional and organised. But, Leanne was in her own way. But, Nicola, of course, was First Minister. She was in it on a different kind of scale to the rest of us.
And afforded a different infrastructure and setup and approach for the briefings as well, I'd assume.
Whereas, looking at the other way around, the person I, oddly enough, felt most sympathy for was Ed Miliband. In the first leader debate, I was very nervous. It was a very unusual situation. But Ed Miliband, it didn't show so much on the television, but when you were standing beside him, you could see it. He'd clearly just been so overbriefed, so overtrained. It was like, right, I say this, and then I move my arm that way, and then I say that, and I put my arm down, and then I say that. And the level of rehearsal was just so over-rehearsed.
Yeah.
Although, interestingly, David Cameron was the most nervous of any of us.
Really?
I was surprised, although when you think about it, it was kind of logical that he had the most to lose.
Yeah.
And the other thing in that first leader debate, I don't know whether this was ever really reported, probably only in the margins, but the poor television crew were totally panicking because Nigel Farage turned up at the absolute last second and had been down the pub first.
Goes to character, right? And
it's playing to the character, yes.
Do we get the politicians we deserve?
Well, what we have is the UK is not a democracy. We don't choose our own politicians. In that Boris Johnson, you might remember him about 3 prime ministers back. He was elected in 2019 by 44% of the people who voted. Most people did not vote Conservative. Most people, traditionally at least, it's changing now, but most people have lived in safe seats. You can be a Tory in Sheffield or a Labour person here in Tiverton. The person who brought me out here was saying, you can vote for that party all your life and never elect a person. So we don't have a system that actually is a democracy that allows people to choose their leaders. And we have a system that, the Tory party, perhaps, don't know, they refuse to say the current numbers, but, maybe 150,000 people across the country have chosen our last 2 prime ministers.
Yeah.
you can be a Tory in one of those old safe seats, and you might you smooge with the local couple of hundred people in the local association, and then you end up as an MP. So I very much believe in democracy. I once debated an American academic, Brennan, who wrote a book called Against Democracy. And his whole case studies with the US and the UK, and his theory was that democracy wasn't working, we had to try something else. My response was, before we give up on democracy, let's actually try having some of it.
Love that line. Did you spend much time with Boris?
No, I've actually never met Boris because Cameron was the leader in those times, and I wasn't in the House of Lords. Of course, now, rather weirdly, I now have Lord Cameron, David Cameron. I'm facing him back across the dispatch box again, which feels slightly weird. But so no, never met Boris. Theresa May, of course, offered the Green Party the seat. That's why I went into the House of Lords. So I've had a couple of meetings with Theresa May. And no, I've never met Rishi Sunak either. So
can you talk us through the process of how you did find yourself in the Lords?
Sure. So Theresa May, her resignation list, because all of this is entirely untransparent. The Prime Minister, as we have seen again and again, can literally do whatever they like. But my best guess about what happened and why Theresa May offered the Green Party a seat on her resignation list was, one, there'd actually been a Lord Speaker's Commission that inquired into how to make the House of Lords more representative, and that had said there should be more Greens based on our election results. So in some ways, some of those 1.1 million people who voted Green in 2015 put me into the Lords in an indirect kind of way. And also, and this looks very mild and meek now, but Theresa May appointed 4 members of her staff into the Lords. And that at the time was considered quite shocking. And so, we look at...
Boris is like, let me show you what shocking is.
Yes, but so I can't know, it's only a guess, but my guess is that offering the seat to the Greens was a trade-off, partly for that. And, Theresa May is the kind of person who does what she sees as the dutiful thing to do. So I think that's how I came to go into the Lords. In the Green Party, we make this as democratic as we can. So we elect a list of people who were our nominees for the House of Lords. We were unfortunately only halfway through that process when this happened. And the guy who's now our elections coordinator, took the phone call and was told, you have to give us the name in 24 hours. And poor Chris had to negotiate, can we have 48, please? And so we had a democratic selection process as fast as we could. And so I was selected through that process to be the person. So then, you have this weird period where you're going into the House of Lords, but you're not allowed to tell anybody. So I had about 3 months like that before the list was actually announced.
And is there an induction process or procedure where you're taught what to do and how to behave and the etiquette around these things?
Not really.
Good. Good.
Well, one of the things. Well, it depends, of course, in different parties. In the larger parties, Labour or Tory, they generally have someone buddied up with them.
You've got natural mentorship to.
Yes. I was really lucky because Jenny Jones, my fellow Green peer, she'd been in for about 5 years when I came in, and she's the one who had it really difficult because she had no one to show her what to do. So Jenny tells the story of one day she was about to walk across the front of the woolsack. This is a heinous crime. It's a perfectly natural thing. You're going from one side of the chamber to the other, you walk across the front of the woolsack. And as Jenny tells the story, some Tory peer, he grabbed her by the waist and dragged her onto his lap so she wouldn't walk across the front of the woolsack.
It's not ideal.
No, it's not ideal. And so, obviously, and things have actually improved a lot since even Jenny came in. You have inductions with the staff about, security and IT and those sorts of things. But they can't tell you anything about politics. The staff don't do politics, obviously. So working out how the politics of the place works is something, if you're lucky, you've got people mentoring you. I'm delighted that Carmen Smith, who's the new Plaid Cymru peer who's just come in, this is the first time I've ever been a sponsor. I was her second sponsor behind Daphne Wigley, who's been in for Plaid for many years. And, Carmen, 28, I'm trying to tell her some of the mistakes I made and some of the things so that she doesn't have to go through the same experience as I went through.
The sort of figuring out the politics must be a fantastic Enigma code to solve for you. Your brain must be running well with like the dynamics that are in there and the spotting the nuance. And you talk about the fascinating people. There's got to be some fascinating people in that room.
Totally. And that's one of the things people often say, why do you want a fully elected House of Lords? And I do, but I'd like to keep some of the people who are there now. For example, John Bird, founder of The Big Issue. And, when you say, working out what the rules are, John Bird just doesn't worry about the rules. John Bird just does whatever he likes. And generally the House finds it so interesting that he lets him get away with it. There's Deborah Bull, who used to be a very famous ballet dancer, now a real champion of the arts. Sir Simon Woolley, founder of Operation Black Vote. So there's lots of fascinating, interesting people in there. I mean, incidentally, all of those three that I mentioned, they're all crossbenchers, so they're non-party people. There's former Lord Chief Justices. When you're feeling brave, you take on one of the lawyers on a legal point, but you've got to be feeling brave that day to take the lawyers on a legal point. So yes, no, I mean, it is, you can have some fascinating discussions in the corridors.
So we touched on it briefly about the incredible local election results we've just had. So staggering level of success and change. How does that inform your view of, the general election and hopefully the next 5 or 10 years of the Green Party? What do you hope we see?
Well, I think, first of all, we're looking at, by January at the latest, I'm confident we're going to see at least 4 Green MPs.
When do you think we'll have an election?
This is not the popular view, but my view is it's likely to be January.
Really?
Because a couple of reasons. One, why not hang on to the ministerial cars as long as possible from a Tory point of view? Something might come up. And also a lack of desire to have any election campaign. I can just imagine it's Boxing Day. I'm knocking on a door in Bristol going, "Hi, I'm here to talk about the election." How well that's going to go.
Yeah.
So, January would mean there's no real effective campaign. So that's most likely, but I think. But other people say November. I mean, there's not a huge difference between the two. But yeah,
there is no logical reason why he'd go any earlier than he has to, is there, at all? And we need to watch the bookmakers' lines on that, because you've got precedent for this, so it's going to come January now.
Well, I did actually, the Green Party listens to me on this now, because I called the last 2 elections and no one believed me. And so it's like now people go, "What do you think, Natalie, about the elections?"
Nice. So targeting 4 seats, hopefully?
Yep.
Whereabouts are they?
So obviously keeping Brighton Pavilion with Sian Berry to replace Caroline Lucas, but Bristol Central, where we now hold every single council seat. And Carla Denyer, wind turbine engineer, is a really great, would be a great MP. The other 2 are quite different seats in terms of character, which is North Herefordshire, deeply rural area. Ellie Chowns, who was the MEP, and everything I'm hearing and seeing is people are just loving Ellie. She's a really sensible middle-aged woman who just represent the area beautifully. And over in Waveney Valley, which is talking about the election results we've just had, it's mostly Suffolk, which covers Mid-Suffolk District Council, where we are the largest party, but also it's part of Norfolk, and we won our first seat on South Norfolk District Council. And a year or so ago, we won a county council seat in that same area in the Waveney Valley. So, and we've got Adrian Ramsey there, who's the co-leader. He used to be CEO of the Centre for Alternative Technology in Wales. And again, perfectly suited, will be absolutely great representative for that area.
Brilliant. It's momentum. So exciting. So let's go on to environmental issues. Mm-hmm. Just a small, simple question to start with. Talk to us about your views on climate change and the biodiversity crisis that we face.
Well, I think we have to look at them in an even bigger picture than just looking at those 2 issues. The Stockholm Institute has identified 9 planetary boundaries, and collapse of nature and climate are obviously 2 of those. But they're also novel entities, which is the worst named planetary boundary ever. But if you think of shorthand as, say, plastics, pharmaceuticals and pesticides, all of the way we've poisoned this planet. And there's biogeochemical flows, which is what we think about what we've done to our rivers in terms of choking them with nitrogens and phosphates, etc. So what we need to do is look at this in a broader round and say we have to live within the physical limits of this one fragile planet. We can't just focus on climate. We can't just focus on nature. We have to think about how do we live within planetary boundaries. And the UK at the moment, we use our share of more than 3 planets, but we've only got 1 planet. And the answer to that is living within those planetary boundaries. But we also need to meet people's needs. And that's one of the things which makes me very positive about where we are now, because if you run a thought experiment, imagine we created a wonderful society, a society where everyone who wants it's got a well-paying, secure job, everyone gets as much education as they want without being laden down with debt, everyone's houses are secure and affordable, we've got a great level of physical and mental health, and then we found there was a climate emergency. Now that would be really politically difficult, because then you'd have to go out and say, we've got to change everything. Whereas now, what we're doing, our politics, our economy, our society isn't working for people, and it's trashing the planet. So the kind of changes that we have to make, whether that's fixing our broken food system, whether that's ensuring everyone has a warm, comfortable, affordable to heat home, whether it's ensuring we unleash the creativity of human beings, all of those things are good for climate, good for all of those planetary boundaries, and good for people and society at the same time. This is the point where I'll pick my book up and wave the book and go, that's why the book is called Change Everything. And one of the key theses of that book is that most people who talk about changing everything focus on technology, solar panels, electric cars, insulation. We need all of those things, but what we actually need is to change how our society works and change our politics. And that's something that actually has happened in the past, has to happen now really quickly. Before the election of Margaret Thatcher and Reagan in the States, we had 40 years of a social democratic consensus. Then they got elected, and now we've had 40 years of neoliberalism. That's clearly failed, and it's the time to create something new and different, a different kind of society, a different kind of politics now. So, innovation is a word we need to recapture. Innovation doesn't just mean technological change. It has to mean social change as well. Innovation like a universal basic income, like a 4-day working week as standard with no loss of pay, like definancialising many of our public services. We need to run things differently, organise things very differently. And that's the social innovation that has to come along with the technological innovation.
So for those people who don't like the status quo, for people who don't like the government, don't like the systems and processes that govern us, what are the changes they can make on a daily basis to start delivering the change you're talking about? What do you want to see people do?
I've got to, would say the one message I deliver to every audience I speak to is we need a society where everyone makes politics what they do, not have done to them. Now, I'm defining politics really broadly there. Organising a litter pick on your street is politics. Politics is getting together with your friends, your neighbours, your classmates, your family, and doing something to change the world for the better. That's politics. So organising a campaign to get a pedestrian crossing so the kids can get to the park, that's politics. I'm really not interested in what people do in their individual daily behaviour. Because you can be the most saintly person imaginable in terms of, no plastic, trying to cut down your energy use to the absolute minimum. But that's not going to have the same impact as putting that time and energy into working for system change. So, I know people sometimes who, will cycle an hour back and forth across town so they can buy one thing that's not got this much plastic in it. I'd really rather you spent those 2 hours getting together with other people to change something substantial about the system, focusing on system change rather than individual behaviour.
So interesting. I can't remember the author, but the quote is, "Whenever I can't solve a problem, I make it bigger." And that's exactly what you articulated there. If we focus on trying to solve the head of the pin, we're not going to solve the wider picture and piece. So I love that.
Yeah, a few years ago, I spoke to the Women's Environmental Network. And, I'm a feminist. That's my first politics. At age 5, I was told, because you're a girl, you're not allowed to have a bicycle. And I've been a feminist ever since, even though I didn't know the word feminism probably for another 10 years. But, I went through my school years all the time being told, not only was I not allowed to do something because I was a girl, but because I shouldn't even want to do something because I was a girl. And so that's my foundational politics. But it was actually at this Women's Environmental Network event that I suddenly realised what really ties together feminism and green politics, which is that We know as feminists, you fight these battles. And there's a wonderful feminist historian called Sheila Rowbotham, and I heard her speak a few years ago, and she said in the 1970s, we thought as feminists we'd win one victory, and then we'd move on to win the next victory, and, we'd just be advancing. But actually, what we realised was we win something, and then the next cycle of elections is something, we'd lose it. We'd get some more women elected, and then we'd lose those women being elected. And we have to keep fighting the same battles again and again. So if we're not going to have to keep fighting the same battles again and again, what both feminism and green politics needs is system change. You need to change the system so the environmentally friendly, socially responsible thing to do is the easiest, cheapest and simplest for everybody.
Why do the major parties and certainly the government not care about environment and climate change?
I think that it's not central to their philosophy. The Tory party, where does their philosophy come from? At a foundation comes back from a couple of 100 years ago. Let's keep the status quo. Let's keep the people in power. Let's keep the money where it is. The Labour Party comes from the 19th century. And, it was support the working man and improve the position of the working man. That's some of the reasons why there's big problems with the Labour Party's philosophy. One of them being that both of them are wedded to the idea of growth. Yeah. And that idea is not substantially changing things, but, even the Labour Party saying, well, people aren't getting enough crumbs, the people who are just getting crumbs from our society. So if we grow the pie bigger, they'll get more crumbs. Whereas what we say as Greens is we know we can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. That's not politics, that's physics. And, we have a politics that was born in the 20th century when that was starting to become obvious. And so we have to slice the pie out more fairly. So their political philosophy comes from places in history that didn't acknowledge the physical limits, that still had the idea there was a frontier, you could just keep extracting more, just keep taking more, you could take more from the rest of the world, you could just mine more, you could just dump some stuff in the ocean, so that'll just dilute it. And so they don't have the political philosophy, their foundational philosophies don't get the physical limits of this fragile planet. And also, in terms of the Labour Party, it's still very wedded on the idea of people's identity coming from paid work. But lots of people contribute a huge amount to our society, not necessarily through paid work. I was talking about the young woman who was a carer before. We don't value those kind of contributions. Community work, community engagement, running community groups, that can be hugely valuable, hugely important. But we just don't value that. It has to be your identity comes from paid work.
Fascinating. How many... So I don't think, outside of the Green Party's work, the environment's barely going to feature in this election process. It's not going to be about that. It's going to be a ridiculous debate about immigration and borders, and about, even less so now, about cost of living. But it's going to be a nasty election, I think, in terms of Tories and Labour Party.
I don't know whether... I think you're right in that's how those two parties are going to fight the election.
Yeah.
But I think the public there's going to be increasingly public going, hang on a minute. Certainly young people, awareness of the climate emergency is very, very acute. We're seeing, for all kinds of reasons, a real stream of people coming from the Labour Party to the Green Party, and their abandonment of pledges on green issues has been a big part of that. And I think, they're also now backpedaling on workers' rights, and that's going to push more people to us. So I think, the public is really going to say, yes, you're banging on about Rwanda, you're banging on about growth. It's one of the things that drives me mad about the Labour Party. Their strongest criticism of the government is that they've been a low-growth government. I have a lot more stronger criticisms than that.
Yeah. I hope you're right. I think I'm kind of emotionally preparing myself for the fact that it won't be as much of a factor as I hoped it would this election, but I am pinning like a 50% increase on the importance of the environment in the next election and 100% in the one after that. So I think my question, so that'll be the first one where my children vote. So my children are sort of 5 and 6 and 8. Mm-hmm. They're going to be this year. So 2 more and my daughter will be voting. And, I read the Lorax recently, the Dr. Seuss book, and where the trees are cut down at the end of it. I said, "Oh," she said, "Oh, but you'll sort the trees out." I said, "We'll try, Emma." And she just looked at me and went, "Don't try." And I'm like, "Okay, yep, good point. I'll do that."
Although you may not be right about 2 elections' time in the sense of, I mean, lots of people are saying now there will be a large Labor majority, which there will be. And that means 10 years of a Labor government. I do not believe that stability is going to break out in British politics. After the last 10 years that we've had, we're not going to see 10 years of stability in politics coming.
No, the rate of chaos can only increase.
I mean, you know, in 2012, when I was elected Green Party leader, one of my lines was, "The future of politics doesn't look like the past." I think if you think over the last 10 years of everything that's happened, whether it's 3 Tory leaders in a couple of months, whether it's the Brexit referendum, you know, Brexit referendum wasn't even seriously on the agenda in 2012. So I can't tell you what it's going to look like, but it's not going to be stable. And we are, you know, again, Wave book, in the book, I talk about the age of shocks. And we are going to see more climate shocks, more health shocks, more geopolitical shocks. The world is not stable anymore. And exactly how that's going to play out, I don't know. But I think we will see a lot more instability in British politics.
So if we fast forward 5 elections, how many, assuming we have the same political system we have now, because I think too many people are motivated to not let it change, how many Green Party MPs will we have in 5 elections' time?
Oh, well, I think we'll be a couple of elections into a Green government then, or at least Greens in government. And one of the things is that actually what's happening, people don't realise. I mean, before the last election, and it hasn't stabilised enough yet to give you a new figure on this, but local councils in England, 10% of local councils in England had Greens running as part of the administration. So that's 10% of the councils. Most of them are some form of rainbow coalition, some form of different groups of people who've got together and not just one party that's running the local council. I mean, I really think they need to change this term. The technical term is no overall control council. But what it is actually is a coalition council, actually European-style politics, where different parties have had to get together, agree a program for the next 4 years for that council, what they're going to have to do, and work together to deliver it. So what's actually happening at local level is we're building an entirely new and different kind of politics, utterly unlike Westminster politics. And that's happening from the grassroots up. And so, you know, I sometimes say when the first Green government's elected, that's when I'm going to retire. Which is probably not true because I couldn't possibly bring myself into doing it. But, you know, political change happens in big jumps. It doesn't happen slowly and gradually. And centrist politics is dead because centrist politics means leaving things much as they are now. And the public knows that's an utterly unviable position. So politics will go either in our direction, which is as a Green, I would say the foundation is there's enough resources on this planet for everyone to have a decent life, for us to look after climate and nature if we share those resources out fairly. The other side, the opposition, is the far right. And the far right says it's a difficult, dangerous world. We've got to grab what we can for us and ours, shove those others away, whoever the others are, build walls to keep them out. And so the contest now is between those two sides. And people sometimes ask me, you know, how do you know that you're going to win? I don't know that we're going to win because history isn't pre-written. It's made by the actions of people. What we need to do is get everyone out there confidence, knowing they can make a difference, do politics to deliver the society we're envisaging.
I don't know that you're going to win, but I hope you do. Natalie, what an absolute joy and privilege and education to have you come and visit. Thank you so much for finding the time. It's been incredible.
Well, thank you very much. It was a fascinating discussion, and you made me remember some things I haven't thought about in a long while and asked me some new questions, which new questions are always good.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.